My favorite year is a 1982 American film directed by the great Richard Benjamin, who's probably most known as an actor and comedian. This is my series, Underrated Classics, and this is where I talk about films that I find to be overlooked, underappreciated, and somehow lost in time, something that younger people don't seem to find anymore. This movie didn't do bad when it came out. It actually did alright at the box office, and it got great reviews. It's a very acclaimed movie. And film lovers know it, and people from the 80s know it, and it was very popular in home video. They even adapted it into a 1992 musical. This movie is one of the absolute most perfect movies you'll ever see, ever. It's astonishing. Till the day I die, till my last day on this earth, man, I will be in love with my favorite year. It is such a great work. Richard Benjamin made quite a few films I actually liked, but this is the one that really stands out. The screenplay, was actually based off events that really happened with Mel Brooks and Errol Flynn. Now, the rest of the movie's pretty much fictional, but that was the inspiration, the setting of the time and stuff like that, and how the personalities would sort of be. I'm not saying that this is what happened in real life, because a lot of it didn't. That's very clear if you research this. Also, the lead character is somewhat based off Woody Allen, because they were both writing for the Sid Caesar show at the time. Sorry. But this stars Peter O'Toole as Alan Swan, who is kind of the Errol Flynn type. He's a classic Hollywood movie star. He's past his prime a little bit. He's a drunken, wild man. It's hard to keep him focused. He's all over the place. It's a very fun, energetic performance from the great Peter O'Toole, and he received an Academy Award nomination, deservedly so, for this movie. And then the main character is Benji Stone, played by the great Mark Lynn-Baker. Benji Stone is perhaps the best Mel Brooks, Woody Allen character type that isn't played by those two, particularly Allen's films, where he casts a lot of actors who then kind of mimic him. Oh my goodness, this is a wonderful turn. He narrates the story. He talks about at the beginning how this is his favorite year of his life, and he goes into that story, and it's so romantic. And it's like, it's a lot of it reminds me of Robert Altman's The Player, but that film almost has this dark edge to it, looking at Hollywood and movies and all that. This movie's a celebration of classic Hollywood and behind the scenes and that time and those kinds of writers and the development of comedy in that sense and for audiences and what it led to in films and all that. This is showing you that early time we kind of forget about. The decades we forget about with movies. We forget about the silent era. We forget about everything being in black and white. I mean, we know it, but we just seem to move on from it. We kind of forget. And then a movie's able to take us back and be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, that is something. There's something really cool about that how people thought about it back then. And Benji just loves movies. He loves television. He loves so much about it. He's a wonderful character. He's a very optimistic, likable guy. And he gets assigned to watch this guy, to make sure he doesn't screw up or hurt himself before he has to show up on this television show. So it's pretty much just following them and their misadventures. And also that the character, Alan Swan, hasn't talked to his daughter for years, from one of his ex-wives, and he's trying to build the confidence up to go speak to her again. If you're a fan of Mel Brooks, if you're a fan of Woody Allen, if you're a fan of this era, of television, and you're a fan of that era of movies and just Hollywood in general, I guess. If you like movies that are about movies, if you like movies that are behind the scenes, like people walking around sets and while actors are doing stuff, if you like Singing in the Rain, basically, if you like stuff like that, I feel. This is like Singing in the Rain without the music almost. There's something absolutely wonderful. I don't know how Benjamin pulled it off. Now, having a screenplay this good is definitely a plus, but the production design, the tone of it, the editing, the pacing, the use of music, the perfect comedy. There's so much about this movie that could just fall apart or be generic, I guess. It could just be a generic comedy. It could be a real studio feeling kind of film, but it keeps its integrity, throughout the whole thing. And even when it does feel like it's being sensational, it always has this underlying truth to it. Like I said, the romanticism. It's got that romantic Woody Allen feel. It's got a little bit of that Purple Rose of Cairo. But then it's got its own thing. It's also really unique. It's not just a movie that seems like a lot of movies. It's also a lot like Radio Days. Can't ignore that. It's pretty much Radio Days. for a different subject matter. But it's a great film. I got, when I watch it, it overwhelms me. I get very emotional, especially his narration. It's that fondness. I really like narration when it's used like this. I like The Wonder Years. I like A Christmas Story. I like when it's somebody looking back, Summer 42, and explaining things from a different perspective now, and kind of giving you an insight into how life affects these things, how these moments affect them. I think that can be a deeper way to tell a story, depending on how you execute it. I know narration is said to be a cheap way to tell a story, but I disagree with that. I think this movie makes a terrific argument for it. It's got a great romance in it with Jessica Harper. It's got it's really good. There's one scene, I can't remember it perfectly, but I think they set in a room and he shows her stuff and they talk about stuff. I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember, there's these little moments with them that are so good. There's this rooftop scene that's terrific. The ending is note perfect. The movie has such a perfect ending because the ending is everything you want it to be and everything you expect it to be, but not in the way that you expected to get there. And that's what makes it more emotional, the structure of it. And what's left unshown but said is exactly the right move. Terrific screenplay. Really should have been nominated for more Oscars. It's a crime. It didn't get nominated for several Academy Awards. Why didn't this get a costume design, production design, screenplay, all that stuff? Wonderful, all around. The whole cast is great. Really no complaints there. I can't think of anyone who didn't do a bang out job. Like I said, it's only 92 minutes. It's a short movie. It's from 1982. It's one of those early 80s films. A lot of directors, I know Tarantino says this, and a lot of other film buffs, is they think the 80s was a bad decade for really creative, interesting movies. They think it was just in a post-Star Wars world, things got more generic and the director wasn't as distinct anymore. That doesn't mean there's not gems, like a Die Hard or an Amadeus, but I don't totally agree with that assessment, but I understand it. But I believe my favorite year is one of those gems from the 80s. And it's one of those movies that would only exist. It only exists because of Mel Brooks and everyone who started working on it, and Richard Benjamin making it, and everyone who's cast. I don't really think it would work as well. I've tried to think of different versions of this movie in my head without Mark Linn-Baker, and I'm like, it doesn't work. He is Benji Stone. It's so, maybe a Paul Reiser type at the time. He did Diner at that time, I think. Maybe he could have done it. But I'm just going to ramble on here. I guess there's not much else to say, because I'd have to spoil the movie. I'd have to go into specific scenes and details. When I started Underrated Classics, wasn't just to talk about movies that are movies you've never heard of, or a movie that maybe, is hated, but I'm like, no, it's actually a good movie. This movie's loved. Kevin Smith has talked about this movie. A lot of directors have talked about this. A lot of famous people have talked about this film. It like I said, it got good reviews, and it's thought of very well. But if you go look at its IMDb votes, if you go look at the DVD sales, if you actually look how many people probably know this movie that aren't from the era it came out in, the 80s, or were a kid whose parents maybe showed them this. I'm talking maybe if you were born in the late 90s, early 2000s, you probably haven't seen My Favorite Year, and I know that's an assumption of mine, but just looking it up, it's not like some film that's on TV all the time. It's on cable occasionally. You can get it on a pay channel, but it's not something they play all the time like Annie Hall's on TV way more. And I think that's why I had to bring it up. This was either going to show up on my favorite films list, or I was going to make it an underrated classic. Because I love the movie so much, it would be fine either one. I think it's like a masterpiece, but you have to put it on underrated classics because it deserves more. It deserved more Oscar noms. It deserved to make more money. It should have been a $100 million film. More people should see it. The Blu-ray, if there, that should be selling way more if there's a Blu-ray. I don't know if they released a Blu-ray, but I believe they did. But the movie itself, it should just be more celebrated. It should be thought of in a higher regard. It should show up on more top movie lists and stuff like that. It's kind of not talked about anymore. So that's why it's on here. It was a successful film, yes, but I think not to what it deserved at the quality of the film is. That is my opinion. Maybe you think the film got what it deserved, and that's cool. Wonderful movie. So that's about it, people. Like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you think about this movie. And if you haven't seen it, do you have any requests for underrated classics, a film you think is underrated? Put in the comments and maybe I'll do a video on it. Maybe I'll agree with you. Or maybe I won't, but I'll just do it for the sake of it, for fun, a little experiment. Let's try that out. And please rewind your VHS tapes before you bring them back to the store. Alright, I first saw this film on VHS and it was wonderful. And you know what I did when it was over? Yeah, think about it.